browser history that exposed everything. I was staring at my wife's laptop screen at 2 a.m., reading detailed instructions on how to gaslight your husband into becoming the perfect man. When I realized that every argument we'd had for the past year wasn't random, it was choreographed. What I discovered in her browser history wasn't just infidelity or financial betrayal. It was something far more sinister, a step-by-step psychological warfare manual that she'd been using to systematically destroy my confidence, isolate me from my friends, and turn me into her personal puppet. But the real shock came when I found out she wasn't working alone. The nightmare started 18 months ago, though I didn't recognize it at the time. My wife, Sarah, had suddenly become very interested in my personal development. She'd bring up articles about emotional intelligence, suggest podcasts about masculine toxicity, and casually drop comments about how evolved her friends' husbands were becoming. At first, I thought she was just trying to help. After 12 years of marriage, maybe she'd noticed some areas where I could improve. When she suggested I might benefit from therapy to work through my anger issues, I actually considered it. When she pointed out that my weekend golf games were escapist behavior, I cut back from twice a month to once a month. Looking back, I should have recognized the pattern. Every suggestion was designed to make me question myself, doubt my judgment, and gradually hand over control of my life to her supposedly superior wisdom. If you're into honest stories about relationships, trust, and betrayal, hit that follow button. You won't want to miss the next one. The real warning signs appeared when Sarah joined what she called a women's empowerment group that met every Tuesday night. She'd come home energized, full of new insights about relationships and personal growth. Suddenly, she was using phrases like emotional labor and toxic masculinity in everyday conversation. "I've been doing some reading about partnership dynamics," she announced one evening over dinner. "I think we need to examine some of the unconscious patterns in our relationship." Unconscious patterns. That should have been my first clue that she'd been studying psychology specifically to use against me. What kind of patterns? Well, like how you automatically assume your needs take priority, how you make unilateral decisions about social plans, how you dismiss my feelings when they're inconvenient for you. I sat there trying to remember instances of any of these behaviors, coming up empty. But her confidence was so complete, her examples so specific, that I started wondering if I'd been blind to my own shortcomings. "I don't remember doing those things." "That's exactly what I mean," she said with a sad smile. "The lack of awareness is part of the problem." Over the next few months, these conversations became routine. Sarah would identify another unconscious pattern in my behavior, provide examples I couldn't quite recall, and suggest ways I could do better. I started walking on eggshells, analyzing every word before I spoke, second-guessing decisions I'd made confidently for decades. My friends noticed the change immediately. "You've been different lately," my buddy Mike said after a particularly quiet round of golf, "like you're worried about something all the time." He was right. I was constantly worried. Worried I'd say something insensitive, do something selfish, make some unconscious mistake that would confirm Sarah's growing list of my psychological defects. The manipulation escalated when she started suggesting that my friendships were holding me back from personal growth. "I'm not saying your friends are bad people," she explained with that same concerned expression she'd perfected, "but they enable your worst impulses. The competitiveness, the emotional unavailability, the resistance to change." When I pushed back, suggesting that my lifelong friendships were actually healthy and supportive, she'd sigh and say, "This is exactly the kind of defensive reaction that prevents growth." The beauty of her system was that any resistance I showed was automatically interpreted as proof that I needed more work. Question her assessment? That's denial. Get frustrated with constant criticism? That's anger issues. Want to maintain my own opinions? That's toxic masculinity. I was trapped in a psychological maze where every path led back to me being wrong and her being the enlightened guide showing me the way out. The breaking point came 6 months ago when I came home early from work and found her laptop open on the kitchen counter. She was in the shower and a notification had popped up from something called Transformation Coaching Circle. The preview message was visible. Week 23 progress report. Target showing excellent compliance with behavioral modification protocol. Target. My blood went cold. I shouldn't have looked. Privacy in marriage is sacred. But the word target echoed in my head like an alarm bell. I clicked on the notification and found myself in a private forum that made my stomach drop. There was my wife posting under the username Psych Student 224, sharing detailed weekly reports about what she called Operation Renaissance, her systematic campaign to psychologically reprogram her husband. She'd categorized every aspect of my personality, behavior, and relationships into a complex spreadsheet. My hobbies were labeled as escapist addictions to eliminate. My friendships were toxic male bonding requiring intervention. Even my career ambitions were classified as ego-driven behaviors needing redirection. But the real horror was in the methodology. She documented every manipulation technique, every gaslighting strategy, every psychological pressure point she discovered. The forum was full of other women sharing similar projects, comparing notes on how to break down masculine resistance and rebuild their husbands according to feminist ideological specifications. One post particularly stood out. Remember, ladies, the key is making them think it's their idea to change. Direct confrontation triggers defensive responses. Instead, use concern-based questioning to plant seeds of self-doubt. When they resist, use emotional withdrawal as punishment. When they comply, provide minimal positive reinforcement to keep them hungry for approval. Another woman had shared, I've successfully eliminated my husband's poker nights, reduced his work ambitions, and cut his social circle by 60. He now spends his free time on activities I approve of and genuinely believes he's become a better person. The secret is patience and consistency. My wife had responded, excellent work. I'm seeing similar results. My target is now questioning every decision, seeking my approval for basic choices, and has voluntarily isolated himself from most of his support network. Phase 3, financial control, begins next month. Phase 3, there were multiple phases. I scrolled through months of posts, each one more disturbing than the last. She'd planned our conversations, anticipated my reactions, and adjusted her strategies based on feedback from other women in the group. Every argument we'd had, every moment of self-doubt I'd experienced, every behavioral change I'd made, all of it had been engineered. But the most chilling discovery was a document titled Long-Term Strategic Plan, buried in her cloud storage. She hadn't just been trying to modify my behavior. She'd been systematically destroying my sense of self to create complete psychological dependence. Phase 1, confidence erosion. Check. Accomplished through constant criticism disguised as loving concern. Phase 2, social isolation, in progress. My friend group had already shrunk by half. Phase 3, financial control, scheduled to begin with suggestions that I was too stressed by financial management responsibilities. Phase 4, identity replacement, the final stage where my original personality would be completely replaced by her manufactured version. The document included detailed contingency plans for different types of resistance I might offer, psychological techniques for breaking down my defenses, and even backup strategies if I discovered what she was doing. She'd thought of everything except the possibility that I might be smart enough to fight back. I printed out everything. Every forum post, every strategic document, every piece of evidence showing the calculated nature of her manipulation. Then I closed the laptop and went upstairs to take a shower, my mind racing with possibilities. Sarah came downstairs 20 minutes later, expecting to find me in my usual spot on the couch, probably watching TV and unconsciously reinforcing my supposedly problematic masculine behaviors. Instead, she found me sitting at the kitchen table with a stack of printed pages and a very different energy than she'd become accustomed to. We need to talk, I said calmly. She looked at the papers and her face went through a fascinating series of expressions: confusion, recognition, fear, and then that calculated look I'd learned to recognize as her shifting into manipulation mode. Those are private communications, she said, trying to seize the moral high ground. You had no right to violate my privacy. Privacy, I repeated, holding up a page titled Psychological Pressure Points, Weekly Assessment. Is that what we're calling a detailed plan to psychologically manipulate your husband? She sat down across from me, and I could practically see the wheels turning as she tried to figure out which manipulation tactic would work in this situation. I know this looks bad, she said, switching to her concerned voice, but everything I've done has been because I love you and want our marriage to be the best it can be. Our marriage, I said, pulling out another document. You mean the relationship where you've spent 18 months systematically destroying my self-confidence while documenting my psychological breakdown for the entertainment of strangers online? Her mask slipped for just a moment, and I saw something cold and calculating underneath. You don't understand the complexity of what I've been trying to accomplish, she said. Men are socialized to resist growth. Sometimes we have to be creative in helping you overcome those barriers. Creative. She called psychological warfare creative. Help me understand, I said, leaning back in my chair. Which part was helping? The part where you convinced me I had anger issues I'd never displayed? The part where you isolated me from my friends? Or the part where you documented my compliance with your behavior modification program? She tried a different approach, switching to victim mode. I've been trying to save our marriage from patterns that were slowly destroying it. If you can't see that, maybe the problems are deeper than I thought. There it was, even caught red-handed with evidence of systematic manipulation. She was still trying to make me the problem. Save our marriage, I repeated slowly, by treating me like a lab rat in a psychology experiment. I pulled out the most damning document, her strategic plan, with its different phases of psychological control. Sarah, this isn't marriage counseling. This is emotional abuse disguised as personal development. You've been gaslighting me for over a year while pretending to love me. The pretense finally dropped. Her concerned expression disappeared, replaced by cold irritation. Fine. You want the truth? You were becoming complacent, boring, stuck in patterns that weren't serving either of us. I took initiative to create the changes we needed. Changes you decided we needed without consulting me. Because you wouldn't have agreed. Men never want to change voluntarily. We have to create the conditions that make change inevitable. I stared at this woman I'd been married to for 12 years, finally seeing her clearly for the first time. Who is we, your little forum of amateur psychologists? Women who understand that sometimes you have to break things down to build them back better. You should be grateful. Look how much you've grown. Grown, I laughed, but there was no humor in it. You call systematic psychological manipulation growth? I call it evolution. You were stuck in toxic patterns, and now you're more self-aware, more emotionally available, more compliant, more dependent on your approval, more isolated from my support network. She shrugged, more evolved. That's when I realized there was no redemption possible here. She genuinely believed that destroying someone's psychological autonomy was an act of love. Here's what's going to happen, I said, gathering up the papers. You're going to explain to your forum friends that Operation Renaissance just got a new project manager. Her eyes narrowed. What's that supposed to mean? It means you've spent 18 months studying how to manipulate me. Now I'm going to spend some time studying you. I'd been playing defense for months, letting her chip away at my confidence and autonomy, while thinking she was trying to help me improve. Now it was time to go on offense. The next morning, while Sarah was at work, I began what I called Project Mirror. If she wanted to play psychological games, I'd show her what it felt like to be on the receiving end. I started with her spending habits. For months, she'd been subtly criticizing my purchases. My golf equipment was expensive toys. My work clothes were vanity spending. Even my protein supplements were unnecessary consumerism. Meanwhile, her own credit card statements told a different story. $300 a month at a boutique wellness center, $200 monthly on what appeared to be spiritual coaching sessions, $150 monthly on organic skincare products that promised to align her chakras through dermal absorption. When she came home, I was sitting at the kitchen table with her credit card statements spread out like evidence at a trial. We need to talk about your spending patterns, I said, using her own concerned tone. My spending patterns? I've been reviewing our financial records, and I'm worried about some unconscious behaviors I'm seeing. Her eyes flickered with recognition. She knew I was using her own playbook against her. $300 a month on wellness treatment seems excessive for someone who's been criticizing my golf expenses. Help me understand the difference. Those treatments are investments in my mental and physical health, she said quickly. And my golf isn't, because last time I suggested that physical activity was important for my well-being, you called it escapist behavior. I pulled out another statement. $200 a month for spiritual coaching. What exactly are you learning that requires that kind of investment? Personal growth isn't something you can put a price tag on. Interesting perspective, because when I wanted to spend money on a leadership seminar, you suggested I was trying to feed my ego. The trap was perfect. Every justification she offered for her own spending could be applied to mine, and she knew it. This is different, she said weakly. How? Explain the difference between your personal growth investments and mine. She couldn't, of course. The double standard was too obvious. I also noticed something interesting about your Tuesday night empowerment group, I continued, pulling out printed screenshots from her forum activity. Her face went pale. Turns out it's not really about women's empowerment at all. It's about psychological manipulation techniques. You've been attending weekly training sessions on how to emotionally abuse your husband. That's not what it is, isn't it? Because according to your own post, you've learned specific techniques for breaking down masculine resistance, creating dependency, and rebuilding personalities according to your preferences. I leaned forward. Sarah, you've been attending abuse seminars and calling it personal development. The room went dead silent. She was calculating, trying to figure out how to regain control of the narrative. You're twisting everything, she said finally, taking things out of context. Am I? Let's read some of your posts together. I opened the laptop and pulled up her profile. Week 12 update. Target showing increased compliance with social isolation protocols. Successfully eliminated 2 problematic friendships through guilt-based manipulation. Her face was red now. Week 16 update. Confidence erosion ahead of schedule. Target now seeks approval for basic decisions and has internalized belief that his authentic self is problematic. Stop, she said quietly. Week 20 update. Preparing for Phase 3 financial control. Target self-doubt has reached optimal levels for implementing resource management protocols. I closed the laptop. Sarah, you documented my psychological destruction like a science experiment. You celebrated my pain with strangers online. You turned our marriage into a manipulation laboratory. She tried one last manipulation. I was trying to help you become the best version of yourself. No, you were trying to turn me into your preferred version of myself. There's a difference. I stood up and walked to the window. Now here's the thing about psychological warfare. It only works when the target doesn't know they're under attack. Now I know. When I turned back, she was crying. But these weren't tears of remorse. They were tears of frustration. She was upset that her carefully constructed manipulation system had been exposed. What do you want from me? She asked. I want you to explain to me why you thought it was acceptable to psychologically torture your husband for 18 months. I never tortured you. I pulled out her forum posts again. You documented techniques for creating learned helplessness, emotional dependency, and identity confusion. In psychology, those are literally torture methods. I was trying to save our marriage. By destroying me as a person, the silence stretched between us. Finally, she looked up with red eyes. So what happens now? I'd been thinking about that question for days. Now you get to experience what it feels like to have someone else control the narrative. What's that supposed to mean? It means I'm sharing your forum posts with everyone we know. Your family, my family, our friends, your colleagues. Let them decide whether systematic psychological manipulation qualifies as loving behavior. Her face went white. You can't do that. You'll ruin my reputation. Will I? Or will I just be sharing the truth about what kind of person you really are? Please, she said desperately. We can work through this. I'll stop the forum. I'll change. Change, I repeated. Interesting choice of words from someone who spent months forcing change on someone else. I walked toward the door. The difference between us, Sarah, is that I actually believe people have the right to choose who they want to be. You believe people should become who you want them to be. Where are you going? To stay with Mike for a while. You remember Mike, one of the toxic friends you tried to eliminate from my life? The irony wasn't lost on me. The support network she'd tried to destroy was exactly what I needed to recover from her manipulation. 3 months later, I was living in my own apartment, sleeping peacefully for the first time in years, and slowly rebuilding my confidence with the help of an actual therapist. Not the kind who meets in secret forums to share manipulation techniques. Sarah had tried to contact me repeatedly, alternating between apologies and threats, promises to change, and accusations that I was overreacting. Classic manipulation cycle. But the most revealing moment came when she sent me a long email explaining how my abandonment of our marriage was triggering her attachment issues, and how my refusal to reconcile was evidence of my inability to forgive and grow. Even after being exposed as a psychological manipulator, she was still trying to make my response to her abuse about my failings as a person. The divorce was finalized 6 weeks ago. I kept the evidence of her forum activities sealed by court order, not to protect her reputation, but because I realized that revenge wouldn't heal the damage she'd done to my psyche. Instead, I focused on recovery. I reconnected with friends I distanced myself from. I resumed hobbies she'd convinced me were problematic. I learned to trust my own judgment again after months of having it systematically undermined. The hardest part wasn't the betrayal, it was recognizing how thoroughly she'd gotten into my head. For months after leaving her, I still heard her voice questioning every decision, critiquing every choice, suggesting that my authentic self was somehow defective. But slowly, with the help of real therapy and genuine friends, I remembered who I'd been before she started her psychological renovation project. I remembered what it felt like to have confidence in my own judgment, to enjoy my hobbies without guilt, to make decisions without seeking approval. 6 months after the divorce, I ran into Sarah at a coffee shop. She looked different, smaller somehow, less certain. The predatory confidence I'd learned to recognize was gone. "How are you doing?" she asked, like we were old friends catching up. "I'm doing well," I said honestly. "Really well. I've been thinking about us a lot lately, about what went wrong." There was something in her tone that set off alarm bells. Even now, she was probing for weaknesses, looking for ways to reestablish psychological control. "Have you?" I said neutrally. "I think we both made mistakes. Maybe we could try again, with better communication this time." Better communication. That was rich coming from someone who'd spent months manipulating every conversation we'd had. "Sarah, what you did to me wasn't a communication problem. It was systematic psychological abuse." "I think you're being overly dramatic about—" "Stop," I interrupted. "I'm not interested in your assessment of my reaction to being manipulated. I'm not interested in your theories about our relationship. I'm not interested in giving you another opportunity to treat me like a psychology experiment." Her face changed, showing a flash of the cold calculation I remembered. "I'm different now," she said. "I've learned from my mistakes." "Good for you. Learn with someone else." I left her sitting there, probably planning her next manipulation strategy, and walked out into the sunshine feeling lighter than I had in years. The woman who'd tried to psychologically reconstruct me had taught me something valuable: the importance of trusting your own instincts. When someone consistently makes you question your own judgment, that's not love, that's control. When someone documents your compliance with their secret behavior modification program, that's not helping you grow, that's abuse. And when someone spends months systematically destroying your confidence while pretending to care about your development, the appropriate response isn't gratitude, it's getting as far away from them as possible. I learned that psychological manipulation can be dressed up in the language of love, personal growth, and relationship improvement. But underneath all the therapeutic terminology, it's still just one person trying to control another person's thoughts, feelings, and behavior. Sarah wanted to turn me into her ideal husband. Instead, she turned me into someone who could recognize manipulation techniques from a mile away and had zero tolerance for people who treat relationships like power games. The forum she'd used to share manipulation strategies was shut down 6 months ago after several members' husbands discovered what was happening and reported it to authorities. Turns out, organized psychological manipulation has legal implications when it's documented so thoroughly. But the real victory wasn't seeing her face consequences. It was rebuilding my life according to my own values, instead of her manufactured vision of who I should become. I'm dating now, carefully but optimistically. I've learned to recognize the early warning signs of manipulative behavior, and I'm not interested in anyone who sees me as a project to be improved rather than a person to be appreciated. The browser history that exposed her manipulation was supposed to be my destruction. Instead, it became my liberation. Sometimes the best thing that can happen to you is discovering that the person you thought loved you was actually trying to destroy you. Because once you see it clearly, you can choose to save yourself. And that's exactly what I did. Thanks for sticking with this story to the end. If you're in a relationship where someone is constantly suggesting you need to change, grow, or evolve according to their standards, trust your instincts. Love doesn't require you to become a different person. Hit that follow button if you want more stories about people who discovered they were being psychologically manipulated and fought back. Next week, I'm sharing the story of a man whose wife convinced him he had memory problems until he installed cameras and discovered what she was really doing. See you in the comments, and remember, anyone who treats your authentic self as a problem to be solved isn't trying to help you grow. They're trying to control you.